Welcome everybody to Celebrating Canadians. My name is Jodi Faith, and it has been an awesome privilege to introduce you to some of the people that I've met and some of the people that I know, and this guy over here is especially awesome to me. This is my dad. Henry Heidebrecht, welcome to the show.
Hi.
So I think I have sincerely got a heart for immigrants and a heart for new Canadians and telling people's stories, Dad, because you came to Canada as a young boy.
Sure did.
Yes, you did. Do you want to tell the folks a little bit? Let's maybe just start there. You came to Canada what day?
We came and landed in Halifax on Christmas Eve, 1949.
And what a blessing that must have been for you guys.
I come from a family that was raised in the Ukraine. It was Russia at the time. And some of the stories that we have about how when the communists took over, my grandma always said it was the best place in the world to live until the communists took over.
Okay.
And then it became the worst place in the world to live. Stories about my grandpa being a preacher, and one night they drove in with the cars into their village, and whenever the cars drove in, you knew that was a bad thing.
Okay.
And they took my grandpa away, and we never saw him again.
I know from my Oma, your mom, from her perspective, especially as she was getting older, and I'm sure for many of you who might be viewing this, if you have these kinds of immigration stories, with my Oma, I felt she talked more about those times as she got older. She wanted to be sure that we remembered some of those things.
We live in such a wonderful country. Canada is the greatest country in the world. I firmly believe that. I believe that from almost the first day that we got here. But some of the old stories about my uncles being taken away and sent to Siberia because they believed in God.
Oh.
That was the big crime they committed. And those are the type of things that are so embedded in who I am and so embedded in our family. My sisters and I all think that how could we be so blessed to come to Canada? What a country.
Yes.
The first thing that happened, we got to Coaldale. From Halifax, we landed at Pier 21, we went to Montreal, and then on the train to Coaldale. And then they had a Christmas party for us the week between Christmas and New Year's. And I had never had a gift in my life. At Christmas time, you got socks and shirts and pants or
Sure.
shoes or whatever you needed. And our relatives in Coaldale that had sponsored us to come gave me a train. I thought, wow, what a country. That was my initiation with Christmas, and I'm sort of known as the Christmas guy ever since then.
Oh my gosh, we sincerely have always had, I mean, I know everybody thinks their Christmas traditions are the best and all of those kinds of things, but we have always been taken back to the attitude of gratitude that you had from day one. And so every gift, even when my mom and dad didn't have a lot of money, and there were years, because you were new immigrants here, even though you grew up and have done well, certainly when I was a little girl, they didn't spend a lot of money on Christmas, but every gift was so well thought out. And I mean, my mom would not put our names on our gifts. We didn't know whose was who because that made it more exciting. And I mean, sometimes the shaking and the rattling of those things. And Christmas was so important just in the gift giving because of that first gift that you had received and how that was a Canadian tradition, which is kind of cool. Now, the other thing that you did, and you've alluded to that a little bit, Dad, but you believed it was very important that at Christmas time, you would also read out of the Bible the story of Christmas, because you had come from a land where that was literally forbidden. And in this land, we were allowed that freedom.
The only Bible in Russia that they would let you keep would be the family Bible.
Oh, okay.
Because it had the history of every child being born, and the Bibles would sometimes go back 200 years.
Oh.
See, my great-grandparents parents had come to Russia when Catherine the Great gave them freedom of religion and land.
Okay.
They all got free land coming in. Catherine the Great saw this great country of Russia and had no people, and so she went to all those bordering countries of Germany and invited people to come, and that's how we came. So the only Bible that we have left is the one that my grandpa wrote down. Every family, my mom had 14 siblings, and every one of them, when it was born and when the child died, they lost 6 of them in infancy because they had no doctors and things like that.
Yeah.
So that Bible is very precious to me because it has my whole history of everything that from my mom's side of the family anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, really that those roots in my Oma's family, your mother's family, and even your father's people became very important because they were sort of scattered. You guys immigrated. And I know Oma would talk about her husband's people and how they ended up still in Russia, even though you guys got out. So do you want to share a little bit of your passage, how you got out, how they didn't? I don't know. This is your time, Dad.
Well, in 1943, I was 4 years old, and the German army came through the Mennonite settlements. We lived in what was called the Malachna colonies, Mennonite colonies, but everybody spoke German there. They were living in Russia, but they spoke German. And the German army had lost all their soldiers in the winter of 43 in the trenches when they froze to death. So they came through these Mennonite colonies, and my dad was one of the men that, because he had a young family, and because he was Mennonite, they would never take him to fight. The Russians refused to take the white Russians, the Mennonites, to fight for them because they thought they'd turn against them anyway. So they came through those Mennonite colonies and they took all the men to fight for them. So that was in 1943. Then we lived in Poland I should go back a bit. They also said that they were taking my dad to fight, but if the families wanted to come along, tomorrow morning, get on the train. Can you imagine? My great-grandma, my grandmother, my mom, all of us kids, 2 of us kids had been born in Russia. Now tomorrow morning you can leave, but you can only take what you can carry. Can you imagine doing that? Would you do that with the life that we have? And so I'm so grateful that my mom wasn't going to go because her best friend was her sister-in-law, who was a Russian girl, and they had a son, Vanya. He was exactly my age, and at home I spoke German. And when I played with Vanya, he couldn't speak German, so I spoke Russian. So they came with us to Dora, and Vanya came with us to Poland. We lived in Poland for a year. We went there on the train with the German army. And then as the Germans were retreating further in the war, they were going back into Germany. We got into Germany, and from there we were able to immigrate to Canada.
Right.
So.
And you make it sound like it was so simple, but can you imagine? I agree. How many of us, if we were given the opportunity to tomorrow morning, if you want out of this place with your husband, we've already taken him, but you can come where he will be. You just get on the train tomorrow morning. You leave everything, and here we go. And it was so, as you said, Oma didn't really want to do that, but it was her mother and grandmother who said, we're going, right?
My grandma said to my mom wasn't going. My grandma said to my mom, the kids and I are getting on the train tomorrow. You do what you want to do. And so she forced my mom to come, and I've been grateful for that ever since.
Absolutely.
It's been just the most. But I can't imagine myself being forced to do that if I was an adult and all my friends were there and
everything you knew.
And we were able to go because our dad was taken, and that's how we ended up in Canada.
Right. Now he was then in the German army. Even though you weren't German in your way, like you'd been in Russia for generations, but you were still German citizens. So that's why Hitler was able to conscript these guys into the army. And when was it then that your father passed away after that?
My dad was in a platoon of 28 men, and they were on the French-German border. And apparently what happened is that 28 guys came back and were going to sleep in this building. And 2 of the guys decided they needed cigarettes or something, and they went into town to get it. And while they were in town, this building that my dad and all his comrades were in blew up. Somebody stepped on a mine, and so they were all killed. And I remember the 2 men that, after the war ended, had made a pact among themselves to make sure they would tell every widow. And I remember them coming and telling my mom that our dad had been killed.
And what a blessing if you consider some of the stories that have been told. And I mean, even you think now about all the refugees in the world who never do hear what happened to their loved ones. My Oma always said that it was a blessing that they knew that her husband was gone.
Yeah. One of the stories I have is in 1988 and 89 when the wall came down in Berlin, and that is that my mom had always told me I had 16 first cousins and 3 of my dad's sisters that she kept in contact with through mail for years, and Mom would always send packages of wedding dress material.
I remember they would send a letter, someone was getting married, and that was Oma's gift to these old relatives in Russia. She would package up wedding dress material. So I remember those days, yeah.
So in 1988 and 89, most of my relatives got out of Russia. They were based in Kazakhstan mostly. That's where they had been shipped from the Malachina colonies, which was the breadbasket really of Europe. They were shipped to Siberia and then to Kazakhstan. And I was able to meet 3 of my dad's sisters and 16 of my first cousins and their families. About 80 of them got out of Russia. And we were able to take my mom along to meet her sisters-in-law and all my cousins. And we've kept a really good bond going, and now, as a matter of fact, when our kids go to Europe, they always look them up, and they've come and visited us, and it's been just a special blessing in my life in the last few years to just be able to get together with them. I'd always seen pictures of them, but what do pictures do? Not much.
Exactly.
This was blood, that was related to me, and so we have had some wonderful times together.
Well, and I love the memories that they share from their lives. You guys with your life growing up with my aunts, they share the experiences that they've had. But one of my stories that will never ever fail to be a memory is when I met Aunt Susie. She came to Canada, and that's when I figured out who my brother looked like. Because all our lives, myself and my sister looked very much more like the Scottish, Irish, English side, my mom and her people. And here's my brother, and he was always this big guy, right? Like big, and we always sort of thought he looked like my Papa Livingston. But Aunt Susie walked in, and I just remember laughing because it's like, oh my gosh, she's huge, and she's exactly like Jason. And it was that
she said,
connection.
Now that's a Heidebrecht.
Yes, yeah, because we never knew our Opa, right? So
No,
we didn't know what he would have been or what he would have looked like. And so Dad, coming out of Russia and through Poland and now to Germany, you have the miracle story of sponsorship and coming across Canada. Can you share with our viewers just a little bit how that came about?
Well, my mom had a cousin that most of the Mennonites that came to Canada came in 1926, 27, and then about 1928 they closed the borders.
Okay.
Nobody could leave anymore. But most of my relatives that had left were living in the Lethbridge-Coaldale area.
Okay.
And there was an Enns family and he was a first cousin of my grandma.
Okay.
My grandma Peters. And they had sponsored my mom's youngest brother and he was only 10 years older than me,
Right.
Uncle Frank. And they had sponsored him, and he came and worked in Canada for 2 years, and then he sponsored us. But the Peters started the immigration process, and they backed my Uncle Frank to sponsor us.
And I remember growing up, the Enns family was very important to us. They were like the great aunts and uncles that we never really thought anything about. But we always knew that if they hadn't been willing to sponsor you, we wouldn't have come.
Right. And we've always been grateful to that family, and I spent quite a few summers working for sons of Mr. Enns. That was actually my Grandma Peters' cousin, and I worked for them, and they always treated me like one of their kids, and so we've had some wonderful memories, you know, just from being able to come to Canada and work under them. And they had we lived in a chicken coop
When you first got here.
when we first got here. And I know when the kids would complain about something, I'd say, okay, let's get in the car. And, oh, no, Dad, we know already. We lived in a chicken coop. We would have to drive out there and just show them where we lived.
Yeah.
Uh,
You treated, you know, what I love the best about my dad, and I can say this to all of you, when it was income tax time and everybody whines about paying income tax, my dad would say, what a privilege it is to pay income tax. So we have these roads and these hospitals and these schools, the things that a lot of people take for granted. You never took those things for granted.
I've been so blessed. Why would I complain? My wife and I went back to the Ukraine, 1990 about. And we were able to go back to the village where I was born. And the first person I saw was a guy that was about my age. He had a tattered coat on, carrying a pitchfork and gumboots. And I just started wailing, and my wife said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Except for the grace of God, there go I." If my grandma wouldn't have made my mom and us leave, I would have been there. And to me, if I can't be thankful in everything, there's something wrong with me. Because all I had to look back toward that and say, that just could have been me. I could have had all the dreams that I've had and had my dreams fulfilled, and nothing would have happened because I would have been there. Yeah. So I just thank God for people that helped us come to Canada. I think we live in the greatest country, and I don't want people to forget that we live in the greatest country in the world. It's not as good as it used to be, but it still is the greatest country in the world, and I'm thankful every day for being.
Well, it's an awesome privilege for me to be here with my dad, and I was thinking every one of us should rush out with our video cameras or our smartphones or something and just get the history from our folks and grandparents before it's too late. My dad has always shared with us stories from the old country. It's interesting for us, we had German Mennonite traditions, which we enjoyed, and it wasn't until, like, seriously, probably 2005 when we went to Ireland and Scotland and England and kind of figured out my mom's side of the family, because we were always so immersed in your traditions. But Dad, you guys have done so well in this country, and you would take us on these holidays where we would do those kinds of things. Tell us about the Canadian dream coming true for you.
Well, I worked for an auto parts supplier in Lethbridge, because Coaldale is where I lived, and that's where we went. And I was able to learn the business from a man that treated me like a son. I'll never forget how blessed I was to have Cy Redfern in my life. And he owned Balaam Wholesale, and I worked there for 18 years. And he saw something in me that he made me general manager of the business already when I was 25 years old. And I always said, "Cy, why?" Well, he said, "You deserve it." So he would never tell me how to run the business. He would always say, "What do you think?" It was such a blessing to me that he would let me blow his money if I made a bad decision. And if I did make a bad one, and we did, he would always say, so what did you learn from that? And I'd say, well, I don't want to do that again. And good. And I've tried to have that formula working in our family business. We were able to start a little Napa store in Brooks in 1976. And it blew up in a bad business deal with a partner, and we were able to come to Medicine Hat. And I firmly believe that this was God's leading to me, because we were not really following the Lord as closely as we should have in Brooks. And I think he gave us a wake-up call.
Oh.
I really firmly believe that that was God's way of saying, you know, you're taking everything like you're the one that's doing it.
Okay.
And I think it woke us up. And when we moved to Medicine Hat, it's been a blessing. And we've had an auto parts supply store here for 37 years. Kids are running it now. And my wife Cheryl always wanted to travel. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how we did it, but we traveled everywhere. And I became a Gideon while we were still in Brooks, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to travel so much, because I could do some things like give out God's word.
Okay, let's just maybe stop for just a sec and explain what is the Gideons, because we would no doubt have some viewers that maybe don't know. Why would being a Gideon be important to you? Well,
Gideons, what they do is they give out God's word. They're not allowed to sell it. We have to always give them away.
Okay.
Every hotel in Canada at one time had a Bible in it that Gideons have placed.
Yeah.
The ministry started about 100 years ago with 3 men that met together for devotions in a hotel and didn't have Bibles there, and thought, wouldn't it be nice to put Bibles in? Oh. So in 1901, they placed 20 Bibles in a hotel room in Montana. And the history of the Gideons is in over 200 different countries. We've given out over 1 billion scriptures worldwide.
Oh my gosh.
But when we traveled, this was my intent to travel always, was to try and take a case of 100 scriptures and give them out.
You could just take stock with you or fill your suitcase?
Oh yeah, you can always do that. And the fact of the matter is that wherever we went, we never came back from a trip that we weren't able to give out the 100 scriptures.
Really?
I remember some of the cruises we were on, everybody was calling me the Bible man and running after me and saying, I'm starting a Bible study here on the cruise ship. A lot of the Filipinos
were working
on the ship. We were able to give out, and people were running up to me everywhere. I'd be by the pool, hey Bible man, can I have 3 Bibles? And it was the greatest joy I've ever had in my whole entire life, was giving out God's word free to people. And you know, on a cruise ship, they have staff of 3,000-4,000 people sometimes, and they come from every different country in the world. So God's word was going out everywhere. It's been such a blessing to me to be part of that, and I still love doing that sort of thing. So.
Wow, that is really cool. And I mean, you did allude a little bit, Dad, to the fact that maybe Canada isn't quite what it was before. Certainly we've talked about immigration and some of the ways that things are done nowadays. You had to pay back your passage when you came to Canada. I mean, what was that like? I mean, you knew as you were in that cold and rickety old chicken coop, hoeing sugar beets, right? Because that's what you had to do. Eating, there was always important things in our family when we were talking antiques and collectibles, is the Rogers golden syrup.
Rogers golden syrup.
Rogers golden
and
syrup.
Peanut butter.
And peanut butter. You know, those were staples for you guys growing up. But
well, we came to Canada, and then we lived with one of the Enzes, one of their daughters, and she was married to John Wall, and they had a farm, and was at Ready Made, which is about 7 or 8 miles from Coaldale. And we worked sugar beets for 2 years. My mom and I, and my 2 sisters who were younger than me, and I was 10 years old when I came to Canada. So for 2 years, my sisters would crawl behind where Mom and I would hoe the beets. In those days, they didn't have monogerm seed.
Right.
There'd be like 100 100 sugar beets and you'd have to leave one here and one here. And it'd be like 100 above outside and Fahrenheit and those, and you know, and my friends would be swimming out in the canal and I'd have to work. And I thought, I'm not really thrilled about this. But, you know, it taught us some values about what life is really like. It taught us some values about what you need to do to pay your way. And I think those are things that sometimes I think we make it way too easy. When I think of my grandkids and my great-grandkids, if they don't have the nicest car, they're complaining. And I'm saying, if I had a car, that would have been really something, you know.
You worked for everything.
I never had a car until I was 20 years old, but none of my friends did either. That's the way life was, you know. If we could have a car on the weekend, from one of the parents would give us a car that we could drive to Lethbridge and see what girls were around or whatever.
You're still a young man.
Oh yeah.
Sowing your wild oats.
Oh yeah. So.
Well, that's good. And so, as a word of advice to anybody who's struggling and trying to make it through these tough economic times, what would you say?
I would say just be thankful. I think that tough times are the best things that can happen to you. I think they mold your character. I think that when you're going through them, you don't think that. Don't get me wrong. I never thought that my tough times were a blessing. But, you know, as you get older, you see what a blessing that was, because everything that you would be able to work for and achieve, you were so grateful. You just said, wow, what a country. If I work hard, if I have a dream, see, I had a dream to be in my own business. Well, how would a kid that came here with absolutely nothing? My mom worked for $5 a day cleaning houses, and my mom was the most generous person that you've ever met in your life. She would give you the shirt off her back. Like that was the way my mom was. And that was ingrained in us. And so I worked for a guy, and we were able to, we had bought a new house and sold it and did that 2 or 3 times, got enough money to start our own business. But while I was driving all the way to Brooks, I was bawling all the way there and saying, you idiot, what have you done? You know, you probably lose everything now, you know. And yet God helped us in so many different ways to make right decisions. I don't ever think that I made all those decisions. I think God implanted some character things in us kids that we were able to make some good decisions. Yeah. And as it's turned out, financially, we're doing really, really good. But there's way more than financial. I think there's such a blessing to friendships and things that you have today that so many people that are just striving after the buck never do that.
Yeah.
I think we have such a good circle of friends that enrich our lives so much that I just want to encourage everybody, you know, do the important things.
Yes.
Hopefully you'll have enough money to be able to do some things. And you know, there were years that I don't know how we did it, or how we went to the bank and got more money. They'd give you something, bankers. You know.
Yes.
It was just, yet everything has worked out so well in this country that I'm so grateful. I just think that there's absolutely nothing we should be unthankful for.
Amen.
And yet we are.
Yes, but today we're grateful that you were with us, that you shared your amazing story. And I want to just do a shout out here to every person who's ever come alongside anybody who's a new immigrant, who has made the life that they have to live something worth living. Thank you for sharing, Dad.
You're welcome. It's been wonderful.